like that. My name is Cristián Bravo. I am, what time is it? So it's 1:25. I am for the next 60 hours Associate Professor and Canada Researcher in Banking Analytics. As of Monday, I'm full professor and Canada Researcher in Banking Analytics at Western University. And I'm here to present a job which is a work. Everyone can see everything? Yeah? Great. A collaboration between, everything's fine? Right, okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. So it's a collaboration. So this is the work of my PhD student, Sahaf Sandhi, who is actually in the UK at the University of Southampton visiting our co-author Christoph Muse in collaboration with Maria Oscarsdottir, who you already saw, and supervised by myself. So I have the pleasure of actually presenting what he's doing, right? So this is quite international, as you're going to see. So this is the work by an Iranian student, by a Chilean supervisor in a Canadian university, co-supervised by an Icelandic professor, and a British who's actually Belgian in a bank which is located in Spain, right? So this is a product of the modern world, right? And I really love this work. So let me speak what it is. So we're gonna see in a relatively similar way to what several people have presented here, including Mario, we're gonna try to see the impact on supply chains on correlated default across small businesses, right? So this is a work that, even though it's within analytics, the intention of this is to improve default prediction. It actually crosses quite a lot into economic microstructures, because what we are trying to see here is how default correlates and propagates across networks as we advance, right, as we move forward. And when someone defaults, right? A company fails, a small business that may be either a supplier or your customer, how does that impact you? That's the whole point of what we're trying to see. Surprisingly, this hasn't been done with too much detail, right? This has been done at a macro level. There are many models about it. It has been tested econometrically, but trying to measure this precisely is actually something quite challenging. And we're going to use deep learning for that and see that we can actually do it. So it's pretty cool. If you don't mind me saying so, imagine if I found boring my own research. Right, so what's the idea here? I'm not gonna talk how important networks are. Come on, you've been here for 4 days and listening how they are, you all know that. But the important thing here is that when we think about economic networks, they are everything. The economy is about transferring goods and services, right, by using money and by using some sort of flow to produce something. So the economy is the biggest network that we all interact with on a daily basis, right? Because as we know, no one knows how to make a pen today, right? There is not a single human being that knows how to make a pen, because a pen is now the product of many multiple things that are going on, right? And that's kind of the idea here. We are trying to get deep into these network structures to try to leverage that given our knowledge, right? And here's the thing, default correlation. What's default correlation? Like I just said, is what happens when one fails, how does that affect your ability to keep producing? So if you're making pens and the person selling you graphite goes out of business, how quickly and how resiliently can you actually get a new supplier, and does that affect you in a way that makes you uncompetitive and then you go broke, right? So that's kind of the idea here. And we know default correlation exists, but here's the thing. We've never explicitly considered it. All modern banking regulation, all modern financial, all the laws that regulate the banking system assume that defaults are independent, right? And we know that's not the case. There are some correlations of like each loan with the macroeconomy, but those are mostly related, that's the rho coefficient in Basel regulations. But those are mostly like an ethereal correlation to like the overall state of the economy instead of the direct supply chain network impact, which is what we're trying to do here. So our research questions here are, bringing network data to predictive models allows us to understand this better. Can we use multi-layer networks? You've seen before that we have used multi-layer networks extensively in our research, so we want to continue doing so. And we also want to go a little bit deeper into directionality. So we believe supply chain is not the same impact if I sell you or if actually you are my supplier. There should be a differentiated impact. And also in the intensity. If 90% of my sales go to you and you go bust, that is supposed to hit me harder than, right, if you are only 10% of my sales, right? So that's the idea. And those dynamics are super difficult to capture using traditional econometric tools. And we can very easily do so using graph neural networks. That's kind of the plan here. So as Maria told you before, we are going to use multi-layer networks and information fusion within a deep learning model in order to try to steer everything together and to make a soup of data that can be leveraged in order to make a better prediction. So the other important thing is that we also want to measure intensity and we want to measure temporality. So we believed that the supply chain is not who you're buying today, but maybe you keep inventory. So you're going to buy something 6 months ago and going to keep it until you need to produce it. And if things are bad, maybe those intensities are going to be reflected on it. So we're going to consider temporal networks, right? So we're going to have snapshots, monthly snapshots of the network with all, and now I'm jumping a little bit ahead to the data, the transactions that the companies did between them. So we were working with a bank, which I cannot say the name, but I have someone from Spain here, so I'm going to say that it's red and not Canadian. And the bank had around 80% of all the accounts of small businesses in the country. So they also could see most of the banking transactions across across small businesses in the country. This is something unique, has never been used before, and is one of our major results because we not only had full financial history of debts, but we also have full financial transaction history between the companies, right? And that's what made this network so detailed, right? And so fine-grained. So we saw when you bought something using a credit card or using your bank account, we could see it, right? There is also, this was a very extensive job by my two PhD students, by Sahab and Kamesh, that they went very deep into that, looking even into factoring to try to create more connections. So they tried to create what we believe is one of the most complete pictures of a supply chain network between small businesses that has ever been built. And I have no problem saying that. And you're going to see the scale of this. This data set is massive. Right, so then we take the networks, and we create a topological embedding, right? Instead of going the GL to Beck or graph to Beck route, we let the graph neural network itself to create the embedding, and we just collect the last layer before what will be the top, the predictive top. And we tried two networks, and here answering a question of some people that asked with Maria's presentation, here we did go into detail in the more sophisticated networks. We use a GAT and a GIN networks that proved to be better to process the size of this data. And for fusion, remember that we have several types: early fusion, intermediate fusion, and late fusion. We use a hybrid approach, right? So we did a first layer of fusion so that we fused together all the graphs into one big embedding vector, and then we fused that later down the line after a custom attention layer that we design, mixing it with other sources of structured data, right? So it's an attentive type of fusion that's called a cross-attention type that we are using for this. There is, in fact, a new transformer architecture called the cross-former that tries to do something similar. So here are the multimodal strategies. We try a lot of them, but actually the only one I want you to focus on is on this one right here. I'm sorry if it is a little bit small. Let me get a laser pointer. Okay, there we are. So this one right here. So you take the layers, you fuse them together using some concatenation or some sort of attention. Then that will give you an embedding vector. You take the tabular data. You may or may not preprocess it with a few dense layers. That's kind of up to the user, and then you can fuse those. We have two vectors here, and then we fuse them once again using an attention layer, right? So a simple cross attention, right, that tries to weight, right, the two inputs to see either the network embedding is more important or the tabular layer is more important when they are combined together, right, in a bidimensional way. That's kind of the idea. And after you have that, then you add a top, right? The top is simply just a few fully connected layers that you can use to predict. At that point, honestly, you can also extract that vector and throw it into an XGBoosting and do whatever you want with it. At that point, you already have the features extracted, right? And we benchmark. So we try to be as rigorous as we can with the benchmark, because one question that we needed to answer was, does this matter, right? Do going through all of this problem beats an XGBoosting, right? That you could just get with a few networks. So we're going to benchmark this against an XGBoosting with tabular data, an XGBoosting in which we extract network data beforehand and we throw those variables into the XGBoosting. So we call it a network enriched XGBoosting, and with separating the layers, right? So we have two layers here. We have the transactions, as I already explained, but they also did, at the bank, they did a fantastic work at combining, right, the ownership data, so cross-ownership, right? When someone owned 2 or 3 different companies, and they put it all together right with that. So we had those two layers, those two networks, and we also benchmark it to independent models that take just one of the network, just the other network, or just the traditional data. Get the idea? So a very detailed analysis that we try to do. And this is the top and a binary cross-entropy function. This could be the normal practice, nothing really to worry too much. So I already told you who we're working with, right, without telling you who I'm working with. We had around 220,000 companies, and they were classified as small businesses, 1.2 million loans that had been granted to construct the financial history over a few years, to a grand total of 300 million connections between each other, so 300 million edges across this temporally. A company can have more than one loan in the data set, and we built 65 features, and one of those features was actually the credit score that they were using. So this is a good benchmark against the models that they are currently using, right? So the results of the XGBoosting only with structured data actually give you a very good picture of how much you gain over traditional credit scorecards of the highest level. I mean, these guys are a huge bank, highly regulated. What are we predicting? We are predicting 1 year ahead default, basically. So that's our target value. So we use 18 months of data for training and 1 year for testing, completely out of time. There were new companies and old companies in the data, so there is a mix of that. As opposed to what Maria presented, I am not going to divide it by whether there have been seen or unseen companies, simply because we still haven't finished those results. That will appear on the final paper, but it's still being produced. Yeah, as I said, we have transaction and ownership data, 6 months look back period. Why? Because more didn't really give us anything. And as I'm going to show you, I think I have a plot somewhere, less actually left some important data on the table. So, after all of this, an XGBoost gets you 0.88 AUC, 0.43 AUPRC, which is a very good model that they had already. So beating this was already going to be super difficult, right? So when we throw this into unimodal models, so just one network, we do not win. Actually, just the network information gets you a bit of the way there, so the network plus the other one, but actually you lose. There is absolutely no reason to use this sophisticated model if you only look at ownership and you only look at transactions. Interesting, right? This already was quite surprising for us. However, when you put everything together, you do win. albeit marginally. So you get a 2-3% uplift. Now the decision comes to the size of the bank. If your portfolio is 100 million, you're not going to be saving much money. If your portfolio is 1 trillion, yeah, you probably wanna go to this, right? Wanna pay this value. So it's all, at this point, I'm at the point where I think like scale is going to be your variable decision. But I promise you one more thing. I promise you directionality and I promise you intensity. So let's expand. This is for an undirected, unweighted network, right? And this is for transaction network, this is for ownership network, and this is for both combined, 915. We're getting there, right? So now we are already way above the standard deviation. So we are now statistically significant. Yay, we're winning, we have a paper, right? But I told you that it was really going to go into the impacts, and this is something that we really wanted to get to. So what do we have here? This is the one I already showed you, 915 unweighted, undirected. If you add direction, so who am I buying, either downstream or upstream? Slight gain, 917, but you do get a gain. This was hopeful. Now you weight. So now you differentiate, normalizing. Of course, the weight is going to be the intensity of the transactions. 920, nice. So now we are way above the 0.88 that we had with the XG boosting. If you add everything together, you get to the best model, 0.922. This model is excellent, to the point that already AUC starts becoming a little bit useless to understand this, right? And you actually want to take a look at the AUPRC. So your uplift in AUPRC moves from 0.479 with the top one from 0.43, right? So you get a 10% uplift. This is already sufficient to justify the use of these models in pretty much any financial institution I know of, right? And 10% uplift is significant. But, okay, this model is as good as it is because they were in this very particular condition that they control a big chunk of the market. One thing that we haven't done, and in fact is something that we are researching, I don't have the results for you now and I don't even have any idea, is what's the minimum size of transaction network? If I start eliminating 10% of the nodes, right? Is it still as good? At one point I can break this model. That's something that will come out in the paper because it's interesting. It's like at what point you will always have your customers with some transactions. At what point this actually is not true anymore? We know that it's true at 80%. You're seeing it, there it is. Is it true at 60? Is it true at 40? That's something that we're still researching. But this is still super interesting. The conclusions here are, A, correlated default is a thing. Correlated default can be leveraged. Correlated default is something that we need to take in mind if we really want to maximize our capacity to understand default, especially in small businesses, right? Maria already proving her PhD thesis that is also true for people, but that's for different reasons. For companies, here it is, it works. Also, directionality matters, but not as much as weight. Weight is by far the most important thing in this area. And as I said, we are studying upstream, downstream effect. We are studying directionality. We are studying a series of things that we believe are significant for this specific topic. So with that, I'm done.